I was halfway through unscrewing the last rusted hinge on our backyard fence when the SUV rolled up. Sleek, black, and shiny enough to reflect the midday sun like a weapon, it pulled to a slow, deliberate stop right in front of our house. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe a lost delivery driver, but then the window rolled down, and I saw her. Perfect hair, perfect sunglasses, perfect scowl. She stepped out like she owned the street and started walking toward us with a clipboard in hand and the unmistakable air of someone about to ruin your day. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and clipped like the click of high heels on tile. "Are you the homeowners?" My dad, kneeling next to the post-hole digger, stood slowly and brushed dirt from his hands. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" She glanced at the half-dismantled fence, then back at her clipboard. "I'm Marla Benson, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. And I'm afraid what you're doing violates HOA Regulation 12.4b. Any alterations to perimeter fencing must be submitted and approved in writing prior to work commencing." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She pointed at the now leaning fence line. "That? You're replacing the entire fence, aren't you?" My mom stepped out from the kitchen door, drying her hands on a towel. "Yes. It's falling apart. The wood's rotting through. We've already had 2 slats collapse in the last month." Marla didn't even flinch. "Regardless, the HOA requires prior approval. That includes material type, fence height, and exact placement. I'm afraid I'll have to issue a formal citation and temporary stop order until the board can review your application." My dad narrowed his eyes. "The fence has been here since 1992. We're replacing it in the exact same location." She smiled, tight-lipped and humorless. "That may be so, but we'll need to verify that placement against the HOA's surveyed lot lines. Sometimes fences aren't exactly where people think they are." That's when my dad's jaw clenched, and I saw it, the shift. Most people would argue, maybe plead, but not my dad. My dad is a land surveyor, the kind who spends hours poring over plats and topography maps for fun. "Is that so?" he said quietly. Marla gave a polite nod, clearly unaware she'd just stepped on a landmine. "You'll receive a formal notice within 48 hours. Have a nice day." She turned and strutted back to her SUV, never looking back. The second she drove off, Dad walked straight into the garage, came back with a faded leather case, and unrolled it on the grass, his survey tools. "What are you doing?" I asked. His eyes were steel. "I'm going to find out exactly where this fence belongs, and something tells me they're not going to like what I uncover." The next morning I found my dad in the backyard at sunrise, coffee in one hand, surveyor's tripod already set up and laser level blinking red. He hadn't slept much, and his face had that locked-in expression that meant he was mentally 10 steps ahead of everyone else. "Do you know how rare it is to get original lot markers that haven't shifted?" he muttered, adjusting the scope. "But we've got lucky. That old oak tree stump by the northwest corner, it's still here. And look at this." He held up a yellowed survey map from 1992, the year the house was built. I leaned in, confused. "Wait, that can't be right. Our fence is here," I said, pointing to where it currently ran. He nodded grimly. "Exactly. But according to this and the county plat map, our actual lot extends 4 feet beyond the fence. That means our fence, this old one that Marla flipping out about, has been sitting inside our property line for decades." My eyebrows shot up. "So if we were to put a new fence where it's supposed to be," he grinned for the first time in 24 hours, "we'd be reclaiming land that legally belongs to us." As the sun climbed higher, he took new measurements, marking stakes into the ground. By mid-morning, we could clearly see it. The real border of our property was a solid strip of land, about 4 feet wide, running along the back of our yard and, more importantly, through part of the HOA's community green space. Not much at first glance, just some decorative mulch and a small portion of the new playground they installed last year. But now, with this new information, it wasn't just decorative, it was encroachment. "They built part of that playground on our land," I said slowly, realization dawning. Dad nodded, scanning through photos on his phone. "And I've got time-stamped satellite imagery to prove it." Things escalated quickly from there. That afternoon, a second notice appeared on our door, this one more aggressive, warning of escalating fines and possible legal action if we did not cease and desist all unauthorized construction activities. Marla had apparently wasted no time. A red-tagged sticker from the HOA Compliance Committee now adorned the half-taken-down fence post like a scarlet letter. "She's baiting us," Mom said quietly over dinner, folding the letter with trembling fingers, "trying to make us react. She thinks we'll back off." "She's got no idea who she's dealing with," Dad replied flatly, tapping a manila folder on the table. Inside was the original property deed, the county plat map, aerial photos from the last 10 years, and even a notarized letter from a previous neighbor who remembered where the boundary markers used to be. That weekend, we sent a formal request to the county land office to conduct an official reassessment. Meanwhile, Dad started speaking with the land use attorney just in case things turned ugly. They did. On Monday, we woke to find bright orange cones and yellow caution tape surrounding the back corner of our yard. A sign planted by the HOA read, "Protected Community Zone, Do Not Disturb." Marla wasn't playing games anymore. She was staking her own claim, trying to establish some sort of visual dominance, but when we called the county office to ask who authorized the obstruction, they had no record of it. "It's completely unofficial," Dad said, voice tight. "She's bluffing." That afternoon, as I was collecting mail, Marla herself appeared, flanked by 2 other board members in matching polo shirts, like they were on patrol. She gave me a tight smile, then glanced toward our backyard with exaggerated concern. "It's a shame when residents think they're above the rules. We have standards for a reason." I bit my tongue, but couldn't resist firing back. "Do those standards include building playgrounds on private property?" Her smile faltered just for a split second, but then she composed herself. "All community improvements were approved by the board and voted on by the HOA. If you have a concern, you're welcome to bring it up at the next meeting." "We will," I said, voice steady. And we did. At the following HOA board meeting, we brought our evidence, survey records, dated maps, photos, and even the legal description of our lot. Dad laid it all out methodically, calmly, like he was explaining simple arithmetic. The room was filled with neighbors, most of whom had no idea what was happening. But when Dad got to the part about the playground, how the HOA had used community funds to build on land they didn't own, a hush fell over the crowd. Marla tried to interrupt, claiming the measurements were subjective and accusing Dad of fabricating data. But when the county official we'd invited stood up and confirmed the findings, her face went pale. One neighbor raised his hand. "Wait, so if they built part of the playground on your land, that's trespassing?" Another chimed in. "Does that mean our HOA dues were used to illegally improve someone else's private property?" The room began to buzz with whispers and muttered frustrations. Marla's co-board members looked nervous, suddenly unwilling to make eye contact. Dad kept his cool. All we wanted to do was replace our fence, but when we were told we couldn't, we decided to make sure everything was above board. What we discovered, well, I think it's something everyone here deserves to know. That night, Marla sent out a mass email calling our claims unfounded, accusing us of undermining the integrity of the community. But it was too late. The spark had caught, and people were beginning to ask questions, not just about our fence, but about everything. Dad didn't waste time. The day after the HOA meeting, he transformed our dining room into a war room. Maps, legal documents, and photos covered every surface, with string lines taped across poster boards like something out of a detective movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was personal. He was quiet, focused, meticulous. Every evening after work he came home, rolled up his sleeves, and dove into the evidence like a man on a mission. I'd never seen him like this. Calm, yes. Driven, absolutely. But underneath it all, I could feel it, anger. Not the loud, flaring kind, the quiet, righteous kind that builds like a fault line about to snap. He pulled out high-resolution satellite images from 5 years back, each one time-stamped, showing the slow creep of the HOA's so-called improvements over our property line, the mulch bed, the swing set, the little bench and decorative rock garden. It didn't happen all at once. It had been gradual, subtle, just enough each year that no one noticed, until we tried to fix our own fence. "This wasn't an accident," Dad said one night, eyes locked on a printed aerial shot. "This was planned." Whoever oversaw this project either ignored the property lines or deliberately moved them. Mom joined in, diving into the HOA's project records, budget approvals, and board meeting notes. And that's when we discovered the real twist. The playground installation hadn't gone through official county review. It had been signed off by the HOA president, Marla, under something called Expedited Beautification Authority, which essentially let her bypass certain red tape for small enhancements. Only this wasn't small. The project cost over $28,000. And worse, it had been approved without a land survey. "That's negligence," Dad muttered, highlighting the relevant line in the meeting minutes. "And if it was deliberate, that's something else entirely." He compiled a full report professionally formatted with diagrams, measurements, and cross-reference documents. It looked like something you'd submit to a federal court, not a neighborhood committee. But he wasn't stopping there. He sent the report to the county land use office, to the zoning board, and to the HOA's own legal counsel. He didn't sign it with emotion, just Thomas Reynolds, registered surveyor. That same week, we started hearing whispers. at the grocery store, at school. Even the mailman asked what was going on. People were talking, and not in Marla's favor. Then the retaliation began. A warning notice appeared for our front hedges being trimmed unevenly. The next day we were cited for leaving trash bins out for longer than 45 minutes past pickup. The day after that, an anonymous complaint claimed our dog barked aggressively at children walking by, even though Max is a 12-year-old golden retriever who barely lifts his head for squirrels anymore. Dad read each new violation silently, then slid it into a folder labeled HOA Escalations. "Let her bury herself," he said. "Every petty move she makes strengthens our case." But even he didn't expect what came next. One night, well past midnight, I saw movement in the backyard. At first I thought it was a raccoon until I saw the silhouette of a person crouched by the new survey stakes Dad had hammered into the ground. I grabbed my phone and hit record. The figure yanked one of the stakes out and tossed it into the bushes, then another. They were trying to erase the evidence. Our floodlight flicked on, and the figure froze, then bolted. They saw the face, but the outline was unmistakable: slim build, ponytail, oversized sweatshirt. The next morning we checked the footage and caught a clear glimpse of the license plate on the car they drove away in. It was Marla's daughter. Dad filed a report with the HOA security committee and CC'd the county office. No more warnings, no more being polite. They crossed the line, he said. Now it's time to push back. He drafted a cease and desist letter citing property rights, criminal trespass, and damage to marked survey lines, a violation under state code. He sent it, certified mail, to the HOA office, to Marla directly, and to their legal advisor. And then, the biggest move of all, he requested an emergency hearing with the County Land Commission. They agreed. The hearing would be public, neighbors could attend. So we started preparing. We printed color maps, laid out timelines, highlighted inconsistencies in the HOA's communications, but we also prepared for the personal attacks we knew were coming. Marla was no fool. She wouldn't go down without a fight. The day before the hearing, we got a letter taped to our door in an unmarked envelope. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. Let this go. You do not want what comes next. Mom stared at it for a long time before folding it up and tossing it in the trash. We're not backing down, she said simply. The night before the hearing, I found Dad sitting on the back steps, staring out at the line of stakes still standing tall in the grass. I spent my career measuring other people's land, he said. Never thought I'd have to defend my own like this. I sat beside him. You're not alone. He smiled faintly. No, not anymore. This isn't just about a fence anymore. This is about standing your ground, literally. And as the crickets chirped and the breeze moved softly through the trees, I realized something. The fight had started over a wooden barrier, but now it was about truth, about boundaries, about knowing what's yours and refusing to let someone take it. The day of the county hearing arrived hot and heavy, the kind of summer morning that made the air feel like it was holding its breath. Our family showed up early, arms full of binders and rolled-up maps, dressed like we were walking into court, and honestly, it felt that serious. The small meeting room was already half full with neighbors, some curious, some anxious, and a few I recognized from HOA events who wouldn't even meet our eyes last week. But today something was different. Whispers filled the room as people stared not at us, but at the table set up at the front where Marla sat alone, flipping through her notes with sharp, jittery motions. She looked polished like always, but her expression couldn't hide the tightness around her mouth. When the commissioners entered and called the hearing to order, my dad stood with calm authority and introduced himself. He didn't start with emotion. He started with facts. He walked the room through the original 1992 plat survey, pointed out the deeded boundary lines, explained how the HOA's playground now extended nearly 12 feet into our property. Then came the aerial photos, blown up and displayed on an easel, showing the slow but steady creep of construction across the line. The commissioners asked sharp questions. Dad answered every one without flinching. Then they turned to Marla. She stood, smiled too wide, and launched into a speech about community values, beautification, and how minor discrepancies were normal in neighborhoods as old as ours. She even said we had likely moved the fence ourselves over the years, implying we were the ones trying to grab land. But then the county's own surveyor stood and cleared his throat. Actually, he said, adjusting his glasses, we independently verified the measurements submitted by Mr. Reynolds, and his findings are accurate to within 1 inch. The encroachment is real. A hush fell over the room. Marla blinked fast, then tried to change the subject, talking about how the community loved the new playground, how removing it would damage morale, how the HOA had acted in good faith, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it got worse. One of the commissioners asked her to clarify how the project had been approved without a formal land survey or permit request to the county. Marla hesitated. It was under the discretionary enhancement clause, she said. I had authorization as president. That clause only applies to non-structural beautifications, the commissioner replied. Benches, planters, mulch, not permanent fixtures or new builds. Someone in the back gasped. Another whispered, she knew and did it anyway. Then came the budget questions. Dad had dug deep and uncovered how Marla had allocated HOA funds to the playground project in 3 separate payments just under the reporting threshold for mandatory board vote approval, spread out over 6 months. It looked like minor landscaping expenses until you added them up. $28,000. No transparency, no resident vote, no contractor license on file. When asked for receipts and invoices, Marla said the records had been misplaced. One of the board members, sitting behind her, dropped his head into his hands. Another woman stood up from the audience. Mrs. Ellison, a longtime resident I barely knew. She cleared her throat. I was on the amenities committee last year. We asked to review the playground budget and were told the records were confidential. Marla said she'd handle everything herself. Murmurs rippled through the room again. Marla's composure cracked. This is a smear campaign, she snapped. This family has a personal vendetta and is trying to destroy the harmony of this neighborhood. My dad didn't even blink. I only care about the truth, and the truth is, this association used community funds to build on private land without permission, without a vote, and without proper oversight. That's not harmony. That's abuse of power. The commissioners adjourned to deliberate. When they returned, their verdict was swift and sharp. The HOA was ordered to cease all use of the disputed portion of land immediately. A full audit of HOA funds related to the project was to be conducted, and Marla was referred to the county's ethics committee for possible misconduct. Her face went pale. She tried to argue, but the lead commissioner shut her down. You're lucky this isn't being escalated to legal authorities yet. As we left the building, neighbors approached us in quiet waves. Some offered apologies. Others asked what they could do to help. One man said, "We always thought something was off. We just didn't know how to prove it." Dad nodded and handed him a copy of the report. "Now you do." That night our mailbox wasn't vandalized. No fines showed up on our door. No strange cars drove past our house. The silence was almost eerie. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like peace, not tension. Still, we knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because people like Marla don't just slink away quietly. They come back louder, meaner, and more desperate. And we had just exposed her entire house of cards. We thought the county ruling would be the end of it, that Marla would quietly back down and the HOA would lick its wounds and move on. But we underestimated how far some people will go when they feel their power slipping. Just 2 days after the hearing, a message appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group from a burner account accusing our family of manipulating the county commission, claiming my dad had used his professional title to intimidate local officials. That same night, someone spray-painted "liar" on our mailbox and left a trash bag full of shredded documents on our front lawn. We filed a police report, installed more cameras, and braced for whatever was coming next. But something shifted. Instead of fear, people started pushing back. Quietly at first. A neighbor offered to repaint our mailbox. Another brought over fresh cookies and said, "We're with you." Word spread fast that the HOA was facing an internal audit, and residents began speaking up at meetings, demanding transparency. The final straw came when an anonymous tip, possibly from a disgruntled board member, leaked internal emails showing that Marla had deliberately avoided board votes, silenced dissenting committee members, and approved personal reimbursements for working lunches at upscale restaurants. The emails hit like a bomb. A special emergency meeting was called, and this time the community center was packed wall to wall. No one stood with Marla. Even the board members who once echoed her every word now sat with folded arms and lowered heads. When she tried to speak, the crowd shouted her down. "You lied to us. You stole from us. You built your little kingdom and thought we'd never notice." Mr. Lawson, a retired attorney from down the street, stepped up to the mic. "I make a motion for a vote of no confidence in the current board and immediate removal of Marla Benson as president of the HOA." Cheers erupted. The vote was taken then and there. 94% in favor. Marla stood frozen, as if her brain couldn't compute what just happened. When she finally turned to leave, no one stopped her. No one thanked her. No one even looked her in the eye. She was done. In the weeks that followed, change happened fast. A new interim board was elected, with Dad appointed as an advisory member to help implement land use guidelines. The HOA bylaws were revised to require community-wide votes for all major projects, full financial disclosures, and independent audits every 2 years. The playground was removed from our property and relocated to a truly neutral area with volunteers from all over the neighborhood pitching in to help rebuild it. It wasn't about siding with us anymore. It was about reclaiming the community. The first neighborhood event under the new board was a block party. Tables lined the street, kids played tag while music played from someone's portable speaker. People laughed, shared food, and for the first time in a long while, nobody worried about violations or secret fines or power plays. I sat on the porch steps, watching the crowd as my dad handed me a lemonade. "You thinking deep thoughts again?" he asked with a smile. I shrugged. "Just how different everything looks now." He followed my gaze to the newly built fence, standing proud and strong exactly where it was supposed to be, marking the line not just between yards, but between right and wrong. "Funny thing," he said, "if Marla hadn't tried to stop us, we might have never noticed the playground, never pushed back. Sometimes the storm makes you check your foundation." I nodded slowly. "And sometimes standing your ground means more than just keeping what's yours." He looked at me, proud and tired in equal parts. "It means giving others the courage to do the same." The last thing I saw before heading inside was the driveway full of parked cars, kids chasing each other between front lawns, and not a single HOA warning sign in sight. In today's America, standing up for your rights, whether it's about your property, your voice in the community, or your personal boundaries, is more important than ever. The story of the Reynolds family reminds us that power often hides behind bureaucracy and intimidation, but truth and persistence can dismantle even the most deeply rooted control. When you know the rules and you refuse to be bullied by those misusing them, you become a catalyst for change. Don't underestimate the strength of facts, the power of community, and the courage it takes to say enough. If something feels unfair, question it. If someone tells you it's too complicated, learn it. And if you feel alone, reach out. You're likely not the only one. So here's a question for you. Have you ever faced an HOA or authority figure misusing their power? How did you respond, and what do you wish you had done differently? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.